In 1989, myself along with 4 more individuals in a group called Flights came to Madison, Wisconsin. Since that time, Joe was our manager for like 2.5 years. Since that time, like Joe, we've lost a couple of members. Gary Michi Robinson, who was the co-founder of Arts of Prevention, and Mark Robinson, who was a keyboard and a vocalist for the group. Myself, along with Bruce Brown, who's sitting over here to my right, and Kenny Fennell are the 3 that's left. But I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I do want to share one story. I remember when Joe booked us in St. Paul, Minnesota, the first time we went down there. And it was during Super Bowl week. And it was in a hotel room within 100 miles of where we were. So we spent the whole week on her floor. He said, don't worry about it, we're going to make it work. I said, where we going, Joe? My daughters, we going to my daughter's house. I'm thinking she had a mansion or something. She had a 2-bedroom apartment. We was like 10 people in there. But again, thank you. And I guess it would only be fitting that we memorize him with a musical selection, but I'm sitting up here like Duck from the 5 Heartbeats. I ain't sung in years. So we're gonna see how it goes. I'm aboard, and he said, Michael, come inside. Ooh, yeah. Could it be it was all so simple thing? Oh, it's time to be written every line. And if we had a chance to do it all again,
was a young fella coming back from Vietnam, and I joined the commandos. I was 20 years old, and I met this young fella that was 40. His age didn't match up with his stamina. His body may have been old, but his heart was young. But sometime after I met Joe, and we marched in 67, I fast forwarded. I'd entered the ministry, and by that time I was pastoring a church, and they had the 50th anniversary, and I met Joe again. And I hadn't seen Joe in all those years. And he said, "You're pastoring in Madison?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm in Madison now. I want to start coming to your church." And so Joe started coming to my church, and the first thing he did, which I didn't understand, he said, "I want you to do my funeral." I said, "What?" He said, "I want you to do my funeral. I just want you to do my funeral." And so the family kept Joe's wishes. Then I received a phone call back in August, and you have to excuse my allergy. And it was Kim. She had the nurse at the Waterford call me and tell me Joe was transitioning. And I said, "What?" She said, "Joe is transitioning. There's no big rush, but you need to know he's transitioning." And I said to my wife, "I've got to go out to Joe's house. They say he's transitioning." And I get there, and Dennis and Kim are there, and they take me into Joe's room, and Joe is just laying there, oxygen in his nose, no movement, not doing anything. So Dennis and Kim and I were holding a conversation. I said, "Well, let's pray over him." And so we prayed. And when we finished praying, we began to talk again. And lo and behold, Joe opens his eyes, starts looking around, talking about, "I'm ready to get up." True story. They had to call to find out if we could let Joe get up into his wheelchair. He's ready to get up, and I said, "I know prayer does." Joe's talking about getting up and talking about this and talking about that. So we stayed there until after dark, and I told Kim, since he's transitioning, whatever time it is, call me. Let me know. I didn't get a call. Didn't get a call the next day. And it was more than a week, I guess, before Joe finally passed away. But what was funny was what Dennis said. Joe turned around and said, "Is that Baring out here talking?" and Dennis said, "I think you raised the dead." And in a quick note, I think some of the people from Waterford, I don't think the lady, the Joe conned me into bringing him some catfish, spaghetti and greens, and rolled him and Carol. And little did I know he wasn't allowed to eat that food. So I got this big bag, and I'm coming up, and I knock on the door, they open the door, and I come in, and the nurse is in there, and she said, hello. I said hello to her, and Judith. Carol's in the other room, and I set this bag on the table. And finally the nurse said, well, what have you got here? And I said, I got food for Joe. She said, food for Joe? What food? And I said, catfish, greens. You know, Joe, you can't. She went off on Joe. And then Joe knew he wasn't supposed to eat that. So she said, I'll let you eat it this one time. But Joe had a way of pulling the wool over your eyes. You know it. I was asked to do the eulogy. Eulogy is saying something good about a person. For 30 years that I've pastored, I've never done that. I've done funeral. I never do that. What I do with a eulogy is I leave the family and the friends food for thought when they leave the funeral. Me saying any good thing, bad thing, indifferent thing about Joe will not help Joe. Joe has run his race. But I need to leave the family something that they can hold on to as they continue this journey without Joe. And so when I was trying to think about what would be a good eulogy, what would be a good sermon, what would be a good text for Joe's homegoing, I had one, and then the Lord took it from me about a day before I was going to put it together and gave me a different one. And what I ended up with was from the book of Ecclesiastes in the 3rd chapter, in the 1st and the 4th verse. And it reads, there is a time and a season for every desire and activity in life. And then you get to the 4th verse, and it says, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to mourn and a time to rejoice. And I thought that would be appropriate for Joe. I've heard everybody else say all the things they had to say about Joe, the funny and the indifferent things, but I'd like for you to think about this. From that text and this theme, Joe's seasons of mourning and rejoicing. Joe's seasons of mourning and rejoicing, because we tend to sometimes get things twisted when it comes to issues of life and death.